Traditional percentage-based programming is highly flawed. Mike Teixeira goes into all the reasons why in his RTS manual, and I'm going to throw a link up to that in the description box for you guys because I'm going to be referencing it over and over in this video. Now here's why percentage-based programming is flawed. There's two fatal assumptions that are made. Number one is that programmers assume that a lifter's 1 rep max is fairly stable from lifting session to lifting session. And number two, programmers assume that by prescribing a certain amount of volume, they know what effect that volume is having on the trainee. Both of these assumptions are completely false, due both to the principle of readiness and due to individual differences. First, let's address readiness in terms of what it means in powerlifting. Now, if you've been lifting for any longer than a few months, you've undoubtedly experienced the phenomenon that we all call good days and bad days. On good days, for whatever inexplicable reason, you're just kicking ass. You can lift more weights than usual, you can do more volume than usual, and everything feels strong. Now, of course, there's also bad days where everything goes wrong, you're not as strong as usual. I've even seen people fail their warm-up weights on really bad days before. Now, this could be due to any number of reasons. It could be totally random, it could be because your girlfriend broke up with you, it could be because your puppy puked on you. I mean, who knows? There's so many possible reasons, right? But the point here is that life happens. Readiness is your ability to perform on any given day, and it fluctuates quite a bit. Now, this is why guys who have been in the game for like 10 years will talk about listening to your body. They've internalized the concept of readiness, of autoregulation, of fatigue management, just without giving it any complicated sort of a name. However, just because you're a younger lifter doesn't mean you need to wait until you have 10 years of experience to listen to your body. In fact, that's the whole point of autoregulation, is that you get a set of tools that allows you to react to what is happening in the gym on any given day. And in this manner, anybody can learn autoregulation, and you're not going to have to wait for 10 years to do it. Now, percentage-based programmings fall apart when life happens. Let's say a program calls for 85%. Well, on a really good day, 85% might allow you to do 7 or 8 reps. On an average day, you're going to get about 5 reps, but on a bad day, you might only do 2 or 3 reps. So if your program calls for a fixed 85%, the entire issue is that 85% isn't always 85%. So you might be working heavier or lighter than really intended. As I mentioned at the start of this video, the second issue is that just because you know how much volume you're giving somebody doesn't mean you know what effect that volume is having. It really comes down to context and a whole lot of other variables. Let's put this into a real-world example so that you know what I'm talking about. Say that we have an older lifter who's 50 years older or more, and they are in a caloric deficit. Now, that lifter is going to do a hard 5x5 workout. On the other hand, we have a second lifter who is 18 years old, gaining 1 to 2 pounds a week, drinking a gallon of whole milk a day. That lifter also does a hard 5x5 workout. Are both of these workouts going to have the same effect on each lifter? No, of course not. The hard 5x5 for the master's lifter might cripple him for a week. For the novice lifter, it might be just enough volume to get him to make progress for his next workout 48 hours later. So again, the issue here is that with percentage-based programmings with a fixed amount of volume, you think that you know what effect the volume is having, but in fact you're just guessing at what your prescription is actually doing. It's critical that we begin to differentiate between fatigue and volume. Fatigue is the effect on our body. It's the amount of stress that we get from a workout. Volume is the amount of work that we do in a workout, and they're not the same thing. Now, of course, they're highly correlated, but they're not synonymous. The more volume tolerant that you are, the less fatigue that you're going to get from a given amount of volume. So, what we really need to begin to pay attention to is how much fatigue a workout is causing rather than solely how much volume that we're doing. And the other problem here with fatigue is that readiness enters into the equation. So with a fixed volume program based on percentages, it doesn't take into account the fact that even between different individuals, sometimes the same individual, due to a fluctuating level of readiness, needs a different amount of volume on a given day. So let me give you an example. Let's say you got fired from your job and you had to go home during rush hour and it took you 2 hours of just fighting through bumper-to-bumper traffic. When you get home, you find out that your dog got sick and threw up all over the carpet. Now, Right after you clean all of that up, you're gonna have to go to the gym and do your normal squat workout. Do you really think that you're gonna be able to do the same amount of volume as usual? And even if you get yourself to do it, even if you get yourself to gut through that volume, do you really think that in addition to all that life stress that you got that day, that you're not gonna have more fatigue from a hard squat workout than you normally would? Well, I mean, you'd be wrong. Of course, your stress is cumulative. So on different days, you're going to need different amounts of volume to get the same amount of stress or fatigue. And because of both of these factors, in terms of the differences in how much volume you need due to readiness, and just due to the fact that we don't know how much fatigue volume causes between individuals, percentage-based fixed volume programs are highly flawed. Of course, I'm not just here to talk about problems, so let's talk about some solutions. How can we go about auto-regulating our training, measuring fatigue, making sure that we're working at the right percentages? Well, the first tool that we need to talk about is RPE, or rate of perceived exertion. Now, while RPE was first brought to light in the powerlifting world by super training, it wasn't really popularized until Mike Teixeira ran with the concept in his reactive training manual. So here's the current RPE scale that RTS uses. An RPE of 10 means that you have no reps left in the tank. An RPE of 9.5 would mean that you have maybe 1 rep left in the tank, or you could do the same amount of reps with a little bit more weight. An RPE of 9 means that you for sure have 1 rep left in the tank. An RPE of 8.5 means you might have 2. RPE of 8 means you definitely have 2. RPE of 7.5 means you maybe have 3. RPE 7 means you definitely have 3. And an RPE of 6.5 means it might be a warm-up, it might be a work set. And an RPE of 6 means that was definitely a warm-up, and we just don't really concern ourselves with anything below 6 for powerlifting. Now, why does RPE even matter in the first place? Well, first of all, RPE gives us the first tool that we're going to need to make sure that our intensity is correct on any given day. So remember, if you're prescribed a specific percentage, such as 85%, you have to remember that 85% is going to be different on different days. However, if I tell you to work up to a 5 rep max, which would be the same as saying 5 reps at an RPE of 10, that means on that day, you're going to work up to about 85% on whatever 85% is that day. So you're going to find the weight that is necessary to produce a maximal set of 5 rather than guessing what weight that might be on any given day. In other words, instead of you trying to fit the programming is going to fit you. Look at the following chart. This chart correlates different reps and RPEs to estimated percentages. Using this chart, we can determine about what our performance correlates to in terms of a 1 rep max for that day. So if we look at the chart, we can see that doing 3 reps at an RPE 9 is approximately 89%. We can see that if we did 5 reps and it was an RPE of 8, for that day, that weight is about 81%. So you can see with this chart and with RPEs, we no longer need fixed percentage weights anyways, because we can just auto-regulate to the weight that we want on any given training day. And this is incredibly beneficial because on good days, you can take advantage and smash a PR. You're not limited by a specific number that you're given beforehand that might have been written 3 or 4 months ago. And on the other hand, if you're just having a bad day for whatever reason, you're not going to dig yourself an even deeper hole by trying to go too heavy and maybe even missing reps or something like that. As you'll recall, the second issue with fixed programming based on percentages is that of volume versus fatigue. We don't necessarily care how much volume our trainee is doing. We care what effect that volume is having on our trainee. So what we really need is a way to measure fatigue versus measuring volume. And thanks to Mike Teixeira and the concept of fatigue percents, we can now do that. So instead of prescribing a 5x5 at a certain percent, I can prescribe 5% fatigue to a trainee. So here's how it would work. Let's say that a trainee is going to work up to 500 by 5 at 9. That's their initial top set for the day. We told them to go ahead and get a set of 5 with 1 left in the tank, and they got 500 pounds. Now to get 5% fatigue, all they're going to do is subtract 5% from 500. Now that's going to give them a weight of 475. Next, what they're going to do is repeat sets at 475 until 475 feels just as hard as 500. In other words, until the RPE is the same, which in this case is an RPE 9. Now, it might only take them one set for 475 to be an RPE 9. However, if they're a really well-conditioned athlete, maybe they have to do 10 sets. We don't necessarily care, we just want to get that 5% fatigue. And as soon as 475 is an RPE 9 or it feels as hard as 500, boom, we know that we've got 5% fatigue and it's 100% measured for us. Again, the whole point of this is that the volume per session is optimized to that lifter for that session. We don't know in advance, especially not 3 to 4 months in advance, how much volume a lifter is going to need on a given day. We also don't always know the difference between two individuals. When we auto-regulate our volume, the programming fits the individual rather than the individual having to fit the programming. So in this manner, whether it takes us 1 set or 10 sets on a good day versus a bad day, we're getting the optimal amount of volume for us on that training session. Now, when we go to actually use fatigue percentages, there are at least 2 considerations that we have to make in the real world. And that is, what do the different fatigue percentages actually mean? That is 5% a lot or is it a small amount? And the second thing we have to do is determine rest between sets and total rest on an exercise. We need time limits. So keep in mind that the following guidelines come directly from the RTS manual. I've just added some notations and additional explanations to clarify the concepts. Nonetheless, these guidelines were determined from Mike Teixeira's experience coaching hundreds, if not thousands, of athletes. But you do have to keep in mind that practical experience is always subject to error, so these percentages and time limits may not work out exactly for you. You need to keep personal notes and keep track of what's working and make adjustments if necessary. The first thing that we need to do is consider fatigue in terms of total weekly fatigue. So as you can see, 54% to 72% would be an enormous amount of fatigue in a week. It would be for a shock microcycle. This would be the same as doing something like Smolov base, just to put it in perspective. Now on the other hand, we have 36% to 54%, which would be your typical high volume week. You should not expect to be fully recovered at the end of a high volume week. It's purposely designed to make you overreach and be a little bit beat up going into the next week. Now from 24% to 36%, we're looking about an average medium volume week. This is about the most that you can do in 1 week and still be completely recovered at the end of the week. Now a low stress week might be around 12 to 18%. And this is great for a recovery week without resorting to a full deload. And for a full deload, you're going to want to keep it somewhere between 0 and 12%. You're just not going to do any fatigue work. You might work up to an initial set, but you won't do any back-offs. And if you're used to a higher volume approach, that's going to constitute a deload. The next thing we're going to take a look at here is individual exercise fatigue. So this chart assumes that you're performing 3 exercises per workout, at least in terms of the ones that you're using fatigue percents for. If you do additional bodybuilding style stuff afterwards, that doesn't necessarily count. But let's keep that in mind regardless. So if you're doing about 9 to 12% fatigue on an exercise, I can tell you from firsthand experience that that's going to be anywhere from 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 plus sets. And this type of stress is going to take you 96 hours or longer to recover from. Now, once you start getting to 6 to 9%, that's somewhere between 72 to 96 hours in terms of recovery. And of course, from 4 to 6%, which is more of a medium stress amount for a particular exercise, you're looking at 48 to 72 hours, which is pretty typical in terms of how long most people take between upper body workouts and lower body workouts. Now, at 2 to 3%, you're really looking at something that you can recover from quite quickly. So 24 to 48 hours. And of course, if you're doing 0%, that's something that you should be able to recover from within 24 hours. Again, time limits are another important consideration here. We need time limits when working with fatigue percents because it obviously isn't the same thing if you're waiting 15 to 20 minutes between your sets. If you wait 15 to 20 minutes between your sets, you're going to be there all day, even if you're doing a moderate amount of fatigue like 5%. The reason that we need time limits in terms of just practicalities is that A, we're not professional athletes, okay? We don't have all day to train. B, this allows us to keep a high amount of volume even in workouts that aren't very long, relatively speaking. And the last reason is that you just need to do this for consistency. We have to compare apples to apples. If one day you're resting 10 minutes between sets and the next day you're resting 2 minutes between sets, well, 5% fatigue in that situation doesn't exactly mean the same thing. So when we have a time limit, we can standardize everything and make sure that we're comparing apples to apples. All right, let's talk time limit guidelines. Now, just to be clear here, the time limit starts as soon as you do your first warm-up with weights on the bar. I would suggest that you try to set your initial weight before the halfway mark of the time limit is up. This is going to give you enough time to do your back off sets efficiently. So if you're doing 9 to 12% fatigue, you're looking at 30 to 35 minutes total for your entire volume work. If you're doing 6 to 9%, you're looking at 25 to 28 minutes. If you're doing 4 to 6%, you're looking at 20 to 22 minutes. If you're doing 2 to 3%, you've got 18 to 20 minutes. And at 0%, you really should be done in 15 to 18 minutes. Again, some of you guys are going to find this to be too short. That just means you need to improve your work capacity and take less rest between sets. Otherwise, you're going to be in the gym for 3 to 4 hours, and if you're not a professional athlete, that's not sustainable long term. Now, there's different ways to employ the actual fatigue percent concept. To share gives you a whole bunch in the RTS manual, but I'm only going to familiarize you guys with 2 of them here because they're the most commonly used. The first one we've already talked about without naming it, and that is the load drop. It's where you work up to an initial weight, subtract a given percentage, and then do back off sets at that new weight until it was as hard as your initial set. So just to give you another example, let's say you work up to a triple at 100 pounds, and you want to do a 10% load drop. So you take the weight down to 90 pounds, and you'd keep doing triples at 90 pounds until it was just as hard as your set at 100. So if you did a triple at 100 at an RPE of 9, you'd keep doing back off sets at 90 until those back off triples at 90 also became an RPE 9. And that's a load drop. The second method that we're going to talk about here is what's called repeats. Now, unlike load drops, you don't work up to an initial weight with repeats. You find a lower initial weight, and then you just repeat that initial weight over and over again until you get up to a certain RPE. So, for example, let's say that I work up to a triple at 95 pounds and it's an RPE 8. If I want to get 2 to 3% fatigue, I'll just keep doing triples at 95 until that RPE 8 becomes an RPE 9. Now, with repeats, you're going to have to take a look at the RPE chart to see how much higher the RPE has to go for you to get a certain amount of fatigue. So I'll put a link to the RPE chart in the description box for you guys, but I can tell you that the difference between a triple at 8 and a triple at 9 is about 3%. And again, that's all there is to repeats. You work up to a weight and you repeat it until you get a certain amount of fatigue. I think one of the things that's most challenging for people is figuring out how to pick your weights with RPEs. So I want to go over how you actually do that here. Now, should you go for a PR every workout? Should you always plan under your PR to make sure that you can at least get that number, and then when you're feeling good, go for more? I think both of these methods have merits, but they're a little too extreme for me. So what I would actually recommend that you do is simply use a method called the estimated 1 rep max. The estimated 1 rep max is calculated using the RPE chart. So let's say that we did a triple at 405 pounds at an RPE of 9. Well, we would consult the RPE chart and realize that a triple at 9 at 405 is equal to 89%. So then we would divide 405 by 89%, and what we would get is about 455 for our estimated 1 rep max. Now let's say that we knew our next workout was going to be a set of 5 at an RPE of 9. Well, we would look at the RPE chart and see that a set of 5 at 9 is about 84%. So then all we would have to do is multiply 455 by 84% and see what number that produces. And in this case, it's about 382 pounds. Because we always want to be making progress, what we're going to do is we're going to add 2 to 3 pounds, or about a kilo, to that number so that we can try to get a small PR. So we'll go for 385. And that way, if we get 385 for 5 at 9, we know that we just beat our performance of 405 for 3 at 9. And look, as long as our estimated 1 rep max is trending up over time, you're going to be making progress and you're going to end up with big PRs once those little ones add up in the long run. Now, of course, this is all fine and dandy, but we have to wonder how this goes into practical use in the context of good days and bad days. So what I would actually recommend here is, instead of trying to jump straight into your top set from your warm-ups, try to do a few work sets. What I would recommend is doing one set at 90% of your goal, another set at 95% of your goal, and then finally going for your calculated estimated 1 rep max set goal. So here's how that would work. Let's say that you've calculated based on your last workout that in order to get a new deadlift estimated 1 rep PR, you needed to pull 500 pounds for 5 reps at an RPE of 9. Well, as you're doing your warm-ups, your first workup set is going to be 450 pounds for 5, your second workup set is going to be 475 pounds for 5, and only then will you go to 500 for 5. So let's say we're going through our workup sets and we do 450 for 5. There's really about 3 options here. Because it's 90% of our goal, we know that it should be about an RPE 7 because it's 10% less. And if it's easier than that, we know we might be in store for a good day. If we do 450 for 5 and it feels like an RPE 8, it's probably not going to be the type of day that we were hoping for. If it feels exactly as you expect, well, you called a good weight, didn't you? It's really when you get up to that second workout that you're going to know what's up for the day. So when we get to 475 for 5, if that is an RPE 7, even though it's only 5% less than our goal, we probably know that our number of 500 was a little bit too low. So you're going to want to adjust up a little bit to account for the fact that you're having a good day. Now, if the set goes exactly as you expect, which would be about an RPE 8 or so, well, you're probably just going to want to go ahead and stick to your plan of going for 500. Now, of course, if you do 475 for 5 and it feels like an 8.5 or a 9, you're just going to call it there for the day, and you're not even going to try that top set because it's clear that you're just not there that day. And so as you can see, these workup sets really allow you to gauge whether or not you're having a good day or a bad day, and it's based on your actual performance with the weights rather than just some feeling that you have about whether or not you feel good or you don't feel good. You're reacting to what actually happens with the weights. So again, your RPEs are based on how the weights feel, not how you feel. With this method of the workup sets, on your average days, you're going to set little PRs. On your good days, well, you're not going to be limited by a little PR. You can go for a bigger PR if it's there. And on bad days, hey, well, you know what? That's okay. We all have bad days, and that's the whole point of autoregulation. Instead of doing something stupid like going for the top set anyways and missing reps and wrecking your confidence and building a recovery deficit, you just don't do the top set that day because you're already within your RPE prescription. Again, the whole point of autoregulation is right there for you in a nutshell. Well guys, there you have it. I hope that really answers a lot of the questions that some of you guys have been having about autoregulation and how you can use it. Of course, I know this is a really complicated subject, so if you have questions, feel free to ask. Now, whether you learn this stuff from me, whether you get a copy of the RTS manual, or whether you check out some of the really, really great free articles on Tashiro's website, which I will link in the description box, you need to, in my opinion, learn about autoregulation. Hopefully this video has convinced you of the why and the particulars, but the bottom line is that, in my opinion, this is the cutting edge of powerlifting training. It's going to be the new trend. It just hasn't caught on yet. Mark my words. RPE is going to change the way that everybody trains with weights, and eventually even sports athletes are going to be using mostly RPE-based programs. I guarantee it. So again, in my opinion, autoregulation is totally necessary, and you need to devote effort to learning about it, and if you don't understand something, please ask me. Now, any program can incorporate autoregulation. It doesn't have to be one of my programs. It doesn't have to be one of Mike's programs. Guys like Ben Rice are using RTS with the cube method. So if you're interested in learning how to use autoregulation but you don't want to change your program, that's totally fine. In fact, one of the specialties that I have here at PowerliftingToWin is that I help people create their own custom autoregulated programs. So if you're interested in custom programs or custom coaching, shoot me an email at admin@powerliftingtowin.com and I can help you set up your own autoregulated program. Now, if you found this content informative, interesting, or entertaining, you know what to do. Please like, share, subscribe if you haven't already, and comment, of course, too. Don't forget to check out PowerliftingToWin.com for more great powerlifting information. And above all else, have a nice day.